Captain Midnight.
This video is brought to you by Curiosity Stream. When it comes to live-action dramas on television, Netflix seems to be doing very well for itself. Shows like Ryan Murphy's Monster, The Jeffrey Dahmer Story, and Wednesday from the showrunners of Smallville seem to be massive hits for the streamer. Of course, for every Stranger Things, there's about a dozen Archive 81s that come and go with little promotion and meet a quick cancellation. Still, there's just no denying that the TV drama is something they've had some huge successes with. But something I've always found strange with Netflix, and it's something I've talked about before but really wanted to expand on here, is how it hasn't ever been able to find that same success with sitcoms. Look, Netflix ratings numbers, whether self-reported or done by the dozens of third parties that are always claiming to be able to measure these things, have always been pretty sketchy and untrustworthy to me. I'm really glad that Nielsen has announced that they're partnering with Netflix this year, and hopefully that'll be able to provide some more detailed ratings. But one thing almost all these rating systems agreed on back in 2019 is that The Office and Friends absolutely dominated Netflix. That's not to take anything away from big Netflix originals like Stranger Things, but it's hard for a show with short seasons to compete with the hundreds and hundreds of episodes that these shows have. They provide the kind of comfort food TV that millions of people obviously want and are endlessly rewatched as a result. Now, to be clear, this is not me saying that these two shows are like the absolute pinnacle of TV comedy by any stretch, or even that they're better than some of the comedies that Netflix currently has. Like, I'll take an episode of the sketch show I Think You Should Leave over an episode of Friends pretty much any day. But that's really beside the point here. There's clearly a massive audience that loves traditional sitcoms, but aside from a few shows that I'm going to get into, Netflix has really struggled with garnering that audience with their originals. And with both of those shows now long off the service, I think it's worth examining why that is.
People are freaking out because
I'm sorry. I gotta go. I'm getting a call.
No, you're not.
Alright, so first off, I should probably address some of the "but what about this show" type of questions that I'm sure many of you are shouting at the video right now. While I'm mainly focusing on live action sitcoms here, BoJack Horseman absolutely has to be acknowledged. While it's not exactly a laid-back hangout sitcom at all, it definitely qualifies as a member of the genre, at least in my head. And it was a consistently very funny show that actually got to finish its run on its own terms, which is a real rarity these days. There's also the unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt and Grace and Frankie. Kimmy Schmidt, I have a hard time really giving them credit for here because the first season of the show, which was far and away the best, was produced to be aired on NBC and then got sold off to Netflix at the last minute. Grace and Frankie though, sure, that was a successful and long-running show, even if it was never really up my alley. But are you noticing a trend with a lot of these shows? Even if I expand it out to sitcoms like The Ranch, an attempt at making a CBS-like old-fashioned multicam, or F for Family, Bill Burr's animated sitcom, they all premiered in the first 3 years of Netflix making its own originals. Even Fuller House, which ran for 5 seasons running off some very tepid nostalgia fumes, was launched in those early years. These days, they're still trying, but with a lot less consistent success. Which brings us to Blockbuster. Maybe the best recent example of Netflix really trying to create a network-like sitcom of their own. It's squarely aiming to be in the mold of Parks and Rec, or maybe more accurately, something like NBC's reliably solid Superstore, which the show's creator previously worked on. And honestly, I think that should be well within this show's reach. The cast is rock solid and obviously more than capable, but it just never clicks. Maybe more than that, it kind of falls flat on its face. All the usual tropes and plot mechanics of an enjoyable workplace sitcom are there, but it all feels so joyless. And most importantly, the jokes are so often just name-checking things the audience will recognize, and not like, actual jokes. Every episode is also a few minutes longer than they need to be, which is a very common Netflix issue, going all the way back to the later seasons of Arrested Development and Kimmy Schmidt after season 1, where the bloated running times blunted the impact of what had been extremely well-paced shows. Though to be fair to Blockbuster, at least it's just a few minutes that could probably be dropped, and not like 15 like many of those Arrested Development Season 4 episodes. Whatever, in the end though, the season was met with a swift cancellation just a month after it was released. And look, bad seasons of sitcoms are nothing new. Bad first seasons of sitcoms especially. But unlike Parks and Rec or The Office, which both got off to shaky starts, Blockbuster wasn't given another season to improve. I don't think it's like a tragedy, but I think it points to yet another common issue with Netflix. If these shows don't explode in popularity immediately, they're gonna be on the chopping block. And I think that's completely antithetical to how a low-stakes sitcom develops an audience, where the viewer getting comfortably familiar with these characters and their personalities over time is a huge part of the appeal. Seinfeld, which Netflix paid $500 million to have on their service in 2021, got the opportunity to locate its strengths over the course of a pretty rocky first season, and play to them in season 2 and beyond. Many Netflix shows, especially Netflix sitcoms, just do not get this chance. They get a single season and then get snuffed out after 8 episodes, just like Blockbuster. When people talk about these early cancellations from Netflix, they tend to focus on dramas, which is understandable. In their highly serialized, designed to be binged model, a cancellation after one season usually leaves you with an unresolved cliffhanger and a feeling that you watched a lot of build-up to get to nothing. But I think sitcoms are just as impacted in a different way, because Seinfeld is just one of so many examples that really needed time to sort themselves out. I could have just as easily mentioned New Girl, another long-running show that does extremely well on Netflix, and it took a lengthy season for its ensemble cast to really click into place. Netflix has obviously given a boost to so many sitcoms through the years. I don't have any hard numbers on this, but anecdotally, I think it's a lot easier to find other people who have watched Community now than it was when it was airing. The platform is great at giving these shows a second life, where a lot more people can appreciate them. And I think that's amazing. That's actually one of my favorite things about Netflix, its ability to put shows and movies I love in front of so many who may not have seen them otherwise. But I think there's also a flip side to that. For better or worse, Netflix has become what TV is to many people. If it isn't on there, or maybe Disney Plus, it may as well not exist at all, which puts genres that I don't think they handle very well in a really bad position. So I do want them to be able to turn things around when it comes to producing these things and give the sitcom a jolt of life on their platform. Like I said, of course there's always been bad ones, but on Netflix, it feels like they rarely even get a chance to succeed. I want more of these shows that aren't Fuller House to be able to end on their own terms on the platform. Whether it's a family-friendly multicam like One Day at a Time that had to move to Pop TV, or American Vandal, one of the best uses of the mockumentary format of the past decade that was just unceremoniously canned. I don't want to make it seem like Netflix is the only place that cancels shows. Obviously that's not the case, but I do think they often put their shows in a pretty terrible situation, releasing them to little advertising and often not even a prominent spot on the homepage. This really cuts off sitcoms at the knees and gives them so little chance at achieving what those old network shows did. While Netflix is paying $500 million for Seinfeld, they're preventing any live-action sitcoms they make from ever becoming that culturally relevant. And sure, almost nothing is going to be as widely recognized as Seinfeld was in the US in the 90s. The media landscape is just far too fractured for that now. But I think BoJack Horseman shows that if you make a good, long-running comedy, people will still show up. And I bet that show still does very well for them to this day. And Blockbuster is far from the first high-profile sitcom to get canned early. Another example I could point to is 2020's now largely forgotten Space Force, which also had an excellent cast. I think one problem that they share is that they both kind of felt like gimmicks from the very start. One is riding off the nostalgia of a decades-old brand, and the other is capitalizing on a big news story from 2018. But those sitcoms that people watch on Netflix over and over again, they're nothing like that. The Office and Friends are about as low concept as you can get. Seinfeld is famously proud to be a show about nothing, and the premise of New Girl is that a woman moves into an apartment. I could go on. My point is that while these gimmicks may make for a flashy title, it's the character interactions that all sitcoms live and die by. And creating the kind of effortless looking chemistry and enjoyable back and forth dialogue that form the backbone of these kinds of shows just isn't easy. More often than not, it takes a little time for the performances and writing to really key into what works best. And maybe even more than that, it takes time for viewers to really warm up to them. For sitcoms to establish the type of characters that people form a connection to and want to invite into their homes week in and week out, or even over one long binge. These are not big, bombastic, serialized stories like Stranger Things, and they shouldn't be treated as such. They don't need gimmicks or pulled from the headlines premises. They need a great cast, great writers, and a little breathing room, some time to show if that cast can click or not. And for the sake of the sitcom, I really hope that Netflix eventually realizes that. So, I'm gonna be honest, lately I've had a real uptick in videos of mine on this platform getting claimed by big studios in perfectly clear-cut cases of fair use, which means I'm often risking copyright strikes. That's a huge part of why I'm so thankful that my streaming service Nebula exists. Stuff like that just isn't an issue on Nebula, and that's just a piece of why it's so great for creators. It's amazing for viewers too, as it cuts out ads entirely, like all my videos on there are ad-free, and it gives you exclusive content from creators like Patrick H. Willems, Jenny Nicholson, Windover Productions, and so many more. Even better, it comes in a bundle with the great documentary streaming service Curiosity Stream, which features thousands of docs on science, tech, history, and so much more. And both services come packaged together at $14.79 for an entire year. Not a month, a year. So sign up now by going to curiositystream.com/captainmidnight, and you'll receive an email welcoming you to Nebula as well. This is the best deal in streaming, and that's at curiositystream.com/captainmidnight.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once, because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started, because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes too.